They ruined their own name to protect yours. That is love, even when it's silent. They bled in rooms you'll never enter, just to keep you untouched. They betrayed every rule, but not you. They stood where even angels trembled, just so your name wouldn't fall. Their battle was unseen. But you were always the reason. Everyone warned them. Everyone left. But they chose to stay for you. They became hated, just so you could feel loved. They lost the war, but never let you become a casualty. They fought demons with your name in their mouth. They broke the cycle for you. That's why their silence shakes the sky. They turned on bloodlines for a love that didn't make sense to anyone but God. You'll never know what it cost them to love you, but heaven knows. The whole world called them foolish, but they only wanted you free. They stood in storms that weren't theirs, just to shield your soul. You called them distant. They were out there bleeding for you. They ruined their comfort to preserve your calling. They chose your future over their own reputation. You weren't a choice. You were the war they never surrendered from. They weren't perfect, but they were willing. Their life got quieter because they screamed for you in secret. They knew you'd forget, but they loved you anyway. Their fight wasn't loud, but it was holy. They gave up safety so your name could rise. They became the villain just to protect your innocence. They said yes to pain because your peace meant more. Every time they were punished, it was because they refused to let you fall. Their loyalty made them lonely, but they still chose you. They buried their desires so you could bloom. You're standing because they knelt. The day they stopped speaking was the day they ran out of blood. They were mocked, exiled, accused, and they kept whispering your name in prayer. They became a ghost so you could live loud. They were called crazy, but you were worth their madness. They died to everyone else just to live beside your name. You only saw the silence. God saw the sword in their back. They left the crowd to chase one soul, yours. They fought so hard you thought they stopped caring. They watched you forget them, but they never forgot their vow. They were never the villain. They were the sacrifice. You were their reason in a world that gave them none. They risked exile. They risked hell, just to love you right. Their pain wrote poetry in heaven's book. They held back anger so you'd never feel fear. They fell on every sword, just so you'd never feel pierced. You didn't see the fight, but you are the victory. They weren't weak. They were sacred. They weren't meant to survive. They were meant to save. Every sleepless night was another battle for your name. You left, but they stayed behind fighting for what was holy. If this touched your soul, don't scroll. Like, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. Their silence is soaked in wounds they took for you. They looked away so you wouldn't see the blood. They carried curses you were never meant to feel. You were covered because they were crushed. They fought every voice that told them to walk away. They don't talk about you, but they never stopped praying. They chose war with their family to walk in peace with you. Their absence is proof they went too far to keep you safe. They keep showing up in your dreams because their love was too loud for the grave. You think they abandoned you, but they were exiled for your sake. They bit their tongue so you'd never question your worth. You were their undoing and their reward. They cried in corners so you could smile in sunlight. They lost everyone, but they found their soul in you. Their love didn't die. It just ran out of places to speak. You think they moved on. They think you forgot what they bled to protect. They were punished for loving you too loudly. They left the crowd to follow the cross, and your name was carved in both. Their love was never loud, but it was never fake. You were the only one worth fighting everyone for. They said goodbye, so you wouldn't have to. They went through hell and never told you. They begged heaven to spare you, even if it cost them everything. They knew what it would cost. They still said yes to you. The world left them, but they never left your heart. They lost everything, but their soul was never empty because it had you. They gave you freedom, and it imprisoned them in longing. You were their sacred rebellion. You don't owe them a word, but you owe them the light. They heard, let them go, and still whispered, not this one, Lord. Their exile is proof of your escape. They were uninvited, but they still stayed faithful in spirit. You didn't see the knife in their back, but it had your name on it. They were condemned by many, but chosen for one you. They knew it would destroy them. They did it anyway. Their prayers fed your future. They buried their dreams to plant yours. You were the promise that kept them breathing. You are here because they disappeared. They fought everyone and still lost you. They were misunderstood, but heaven recorded their faithfulness. You were loved in silence, but screamed for in prayer. They faded in front of you, but never behind your back. They walked away from everything, but never walked away from you. They're the reason you didn't break completely. They stayed quiet, not because they didn't care, because they did. You thought they changed. They just chose not to show the fight anymore. They're still fighting, just not where you can see. The ones who vanish after the battle are often the ones who won it for you. They were your secret soldier. You were their sacred cause. They died to their ego the day you chose someone else and loved you anyway. They were never weak. They were exhausted from protecting you. You were their greatest silence and their deepest scream. They were erased from your story, but etched into every miracle that followed. They stood alone so you could belong. They wept with God about you and never mentioned your name again. You wanted peace. They wanted you alive to taste it. They lost their innocence, shielding yours. Their goodbye wasn't abandonment. It was surrender. They never asked for credit. They just hoped you'd heal. The reason you didn't collapse was them, bruised on the floor in prayer. They let everyone believe they were wrong, because you were right to them. Their pain became the prophecy that kept you alive. They knew you wouldn't understand. They protected you anyway. They were made the villain so you could be seen as chosen. You ran from them, but not once did they curse your name. They gave up being understood to make sure you were never unloved. You called them unstable, but they were fighting wars you never saw. They gave up home, belonging, and rest, so you'd never feel homeless in this world. Every door that opened for you, they knocked on with blood. They were misjudged for loving you too deeply. They never asked you to choose. They just chose you every time. They hid their heartbreak so your heart could remain soft. They forgave what you never apologized for. You moved on. They moved into silence. Their name was ruined. Yours was restored. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to keep you breathing. Every blade in their back was a shield over your name. You didn't hear them scream, but God did. They burned every bridge to light your path home. Their loyalty became their loneliness. You were the only reason. They faced exile smiling because it kept you untouched. They were never meant to be seen, only to cover you. They took the blame so you wouldn't break. You think they gave up? No, they gave you up to save you. You were protected by someone who never demanded credit. Their name was dragged so yours could rise. They fought off curses with prayers whispered in secret. You walked in peace. They bled in silence. They stood in front of fire and never flinched for you. They were rejected because they refused to reject you. They suffered being misunderstood, but you understood safety. Their downfall was the reason you survived. Their silence was a sacred covering, not absence. Everyone left. They stayed, even when they disappeared. They were punished for seeing heaven in your eyes. They fought until they had nothing left, then prayed you wouldn't notice. You think you healed alone. You didn't. They risked their soul to protect your story. They lost sleep for the version of you you hadn't become. They didn't want recognition. They wanted your freedom. Every unanswered call was a battle they fought with your name in their chest. They kept you sacred, even after you forgot them. They swallowed every insult so you'd never hear one. They were seen as reckless. You were the reason. They whispered your name in their lowest hour, still choosing love. They were left with scars. You were left with strength. They didn't fight for attention. They fought for your soul. They buried their pain in prayers you'll never hear. They didn't stop fighting. They just ran out of blood. They were made a fool for loving you out loud. You didn't see the war, but you were its prize. They sacrificed everything to make sure you'd never have to. They stood alone, but never let you feel it. They weren't broken by you. They were broken for you. Their strength looked like weakness because it was holy. You thought they were gone, but your breath still carries their love. They made peace with being erased if it meant you were remembered. They couldn't fix everything, but they could keep you from falling. They didn't need to be loved back, just to see you loved. You were never alone. Their silence was warfare. They took the spiritual bullets meant for you. Their goodbye was your beginning. They gave up comfort so you could sleep in peace. They were laughed at for believing in your future. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. You thrived because someone loved you more than they loved being seen. They became the villain to guard your light. Their heartbreak wasn't punishment. It was proof of their protection. They held back tears so you wouldn't taste sorrow. They called them delusional, but only love sees that far ahead. They would have rather died than let you feel unworthy. They were mocked, but still carried your name like a flame. Their prayers hit heaven's floor every night for you. They gave up everything, except the hope that you'd make it. You left. They stayed in spirit. You grew strong. They disappeared to make room. They didn't speak because they couldn't scream anymore. They stayed up wondering if you knew how much they fought. They surrendered their dreams to become the root under yours. You were never a burden to them, only a reason. They lost their name defending yours. You found peace. They found silence. You'll never know what they gave up to keep you untouched. They didn't need credit. They needed you whole. They were the sacrifice no one recognized. They stayed loyal even when their name was dirt. They gave you clarity by embracing chaos. They became invisible so you could be seen. They battled addiction, grief, and betrayal, just to still protect your peace. You were saved by the one you called unstable. They lost their future to give you one. They covered you in prayer until they collapsed in grief. They were quiet because they had nothing left to scream. You moved on, but you still carry their echo. Their pain became your prophecy. They were your guardian, not your villain. You thought they abandoned you. They just didn't want to drag you through their storm. They knew loving you would cost them everything. Their hurt wasn't revenge, it was holy. They were cast out. You were called chosen. They carried your sins like sacred offerings. Their heartbreak made room for your joy. They cried to God so you wouldn't have to cry to anyone. They were made an example. You were made safe. Their silence was a sermon, and you were the altar. They didn't want justice. They wanted your peace. They watched you love others and still covered you in prayer. They never cursed you, not even after they shattered. They became the ghost that guards you. You're not haunted by them. You're held by them. They couldn't stay, but they never left. They whispered your name into every storm they survived. They walked into darkness to keep you in the light. They vanished, but their soul still circles yours. Your joy was born from someone else's wilderness. They were never your enemy. They were your armor. You forgot them, but heaven remembers the war they won for you. They chose your future over their own healing. You call it grace, but it was their suffering. They broke, so your name could stay whole. You flourished because they faded. They endured dishonor so you could walk in dignity. They saw your crown when others saw your chains. They were always last as long as you were first. Their sacrifice was the sermon you never heard. They stayed behind so you could walk forward. They wanted nothing except your freedom. They were misunderstood, misnamed, mistaken, but never misaligned. They left quietly, but with your name still clutched in their spirit. Their hurt never hardened them, because they loved you more than their pain. They waited for you in rooms they were never invited into. They were punished for loving you too freely. They watched you choose others, and still chose to fight for your soul. They were never safe, but you were. You rested. They wrestled. They gave up healing for themselves to intercede for you. They called them obsessed, but it was just unshakable love. You were never alone in the fire. They were burning beside you. They whispered to heaven about you, long after you stopped speaking. They didn't fight for attention. They fought for your redemption. They broke tradition, family, and silence for your name. They kissed betrayal just to keep you clean. You live in answered prayers that nearly killed them. They weren't loud, but they never let go. You don't owe them your heart, but it still beats because of theirs. They didn't fight for you to notice. They fought for you to rise. They didn't love easy. They loved eternal. You ran. They remained, just not visibly. They gave their only peace to see you breathe. Their suffering stitched the path your feet now praise. They stayed when the cost was everything. You were their silent mission. They walked through shame with your name, stitched in glory. They chose the cross. You received the crown. You saw the scars, never the battles.